call to order for the Bartlett Economic Development Commission meeting of January 14th, 2019, first one of the year. Tony, can we have a roll call, please?
Yes, Jerry Cabasco.
Here.
Cecilia Green.
Here.
Robert Perry. Tracy Smadilla. Here. Rich Miskowitz. Joe Laporte.
Here.
Adam Lewinsky.
Here.
Stephanie Ganzi.
Here.
Thank you. Do you have a quorum tonight?
Okay, next agenda item would be the approval of the previous minutes from December 10th, 2018. Minute approval. Do we have a discussion or anybody want to make a motion to approve?
Motion to approve the minutes from
Okay,
December.
we have a second on Stephanie's motion?
Second.
Okay, all in favor? Aye. Carries. Next item is the BEDA program discussion. Tony, you going to lead the discussion on that?
Thank you. This is about the BEDA program that you are all very familiar with at this point. And I'm going to do a fairly fast recap of it. And then what I'm looking for is some input from the commissioners as the program goes forward. And as you all know, this is a new program that the village board created this current fiscal year. Our fiscal years go from May 1 through April 30th, so we're about 8 months into it at this point. This is a first-time program. We haven't really had anything really like this. It's not TIF funded. It's just out of the general fund, a line item of $150,000 that Scott and I kind of think of as a pilot program this year to see if it indeed works and what's good about it and maybe what's not so good about it and how it can be improved. So this program, and what I have before you tonight, I had meant to include it in the packet, but I have the application here. Those of you who were on the EDC this past April and May, we looked at it a few times as we created this program. So the BEDA program provides grants of up to $50,000. And as you know, we have a stress towards utilizing it for sales tax producing businesses. So although there's many new businesses that could use it that are also in the service industry, you know, we found it more challenging to attract sales tax producing businesses and restaurants to the village over the years. Also that we targeted this particularly to try to attract these businesses to vacant or underutilized vacancies throughout the village in order to attract some private development. This is money that we seek to leverage private development money with, and also to create new job opportunities for area residents. So, so far, we've been using these limited funds in an effort to attract businesses that further enhance the village's eating, drinking, and shopping offerings. So far, the Economic Development Commission, you've had the opportunity to meet and ask questions of 4 grant applicants. And I also want to mention the very first one that was back in June, AJ Tantuaya with Indian Express. His business has since opened in Westgate Commons, so he's been open for a few weeks now. We're going to be shooting one of those Discover Bartlett videos there later this week. The 4 applicants so far have been the one I just mentioned, Indian Express, for a $25,000 grant. A Siri Indian grocery store, as you recall, applied for a grant so they could add hot food items to their grocery offerings, and they got one for $15,000. Manny Rafidia is the gentleman we've been working with for all of 2018 in an effort to get him to purchase and redevelop Bartlett Plaza. And we recommended the maximum amount for him, and he may be coming in next year as well for an additional one. And the latest one, which was last month, was John Castilla with the Bartlett tap for a $35,000 grant. We're still working with him on his very substantial rehabilitation of the former Platform 18 building at 113 West Railroad to open it as the Bartlett tap in the next few months. So our staff here, the EDC, Mayor Wallace, and the board hope to maximize the private investment needed to revitalize these properties throughout the community by continuing and enhancing this program. We have met with several additional potential applicants in the coming months. I can't say for sure whether there's going to be an applicant in the next meeting, but there certainly will be several this year. And it's put in my memo, it's really impossible to predict exactly who will apply, but we have a pretty good feeling of some people who seem like they're inclined to do it. And also lends itself to certain properties. There's a limited number of vacant properties that need quite a bit of rehab that could be enhanced with BEDA grants. So what I have in front of you today is the application for you to take a look at in front of you, and also just in our staff meetings, we had come up with a few things that we might be able to do to enhance this program. And some of the things that I'm asking for you to consider and to weigh in on and perhaps lend some suggestions to. I did a couple of bullet points here, just suggesting we could possibly add a requirement to prove that property taxes are current on the properties. Remember, they don't have to be property owners that apply, but they can be tenants. And I'm just going to say that some of the properties that we've looked at, considered, and had discussions on BEDA grants for, I've taken to checking on the, make sure the property taxes are current. And I'll just say maybe they haven't always been. So that's something that we can certainly easily add as a criteria for somebody to certify that the property taxes are current. One of them is, that came up in one of our earlier discussions. I remember Commissioner Gansey brought it to our attention, in particular with Mr. Rafidia with Bartlett Plaza, who does intend to apply for another $50,000 BEDA grant next year, or whatever the limit would be if the program is continued. And keep in mind that Bartlett Plaza is somewhat unique in that it's comprised of two PINs, two property identification numbers. There's two separate buildings. The one building, of course, housing the big empty grocery store, and then the one we call the L-shaped building that's anchored by Ace in the corner and Pasta Mia facing the street. So that was something I just added to the program. Kind of a carryover from our TIF rebate program was the 3-year limitation. So there's no specific need necessarily to have that, or it could be on a case-by-case basis. The third thing I want to mention is a requirement for a business plan. The very first applicant that came in, it hadn't been a requirement of this program. I never intended for businesses to have to submit a business plan when they applied. However, some of these new startups that came up before the village board, the very first one, the board had asked for a business plan. So it delayed AJ Tantuaya's application maybe a couple months while he worked on that. And then the later applicants, we did ask to submit them. So that could be added. A timing requirement could be added. I won't go on at length about that, besides that there's people who do have money coming to them, and we might want to consider putting some type of time limitation on it, so we're not constantly carrying a certain amount of, let's call it debt, to a particular project for a period of a year, 2 years, 3 years. We don't want somebody to come back 2 years later to do it, while we could be allocating those funds to another project. And then, last but certainly not least, the EDC's input on the amount of the funding, keeping in mind what we did was we funded it with $150,000, maximum $50,000 grant, so easy math. If there were 3 big projects, there would be 3 grants in a year. If there were 10 very small projects of $15,000, we try to, every time I've presented these to the EDC, I've always said, you know, we're trying to keep in mind the upcoming ones. We're not trying to allocate it all at once to one person. So those are a couple of things. Those are just staff recommendations. I'm sure, as you've heard the applicants and you've thought about their applications, you've had other ideas that Scott and I haven't. And this is an opportunity for us to hear some feedback from you on it. Also, if it's something that you want to mull over, I can bring it back to next month's meeting as well.
So one thing I would point out is the timing requirement for starting a project, should we say like, I mean, I guess if they start, but like, what about something about like finishing? Because wouldn't we still have to hold the funds if they, like, let's say they said, oh, I started the project, but it's going to take me another year. Like, how would we don't give the reimbursement until they have the receipts from it. So how would that work?
I think for the time being, that might even end up being an accounting issue with the village. For instance, with Mr. Rafidia, I'll use him for an example of somebody who was recommended a $50,000 grant from staff from the EDC and then later approved by the board. His project for sure wouldn't be done by May 1st. But we allocated the money in this budget cycle. That's something I suppose Scott and I are going to have to discuss with the finance director, because we start each new budget year May 1, but yet we're still, I'm going to use the word owe, we're still going to kind of owe him $50,000 when he does that project.
Nothing in his agreement has come with the proviso that he needs to start within a specific date. I thought when we originally implemented the program last summer, the proviso was 6 months that they start the project from the application.
That's, I don't recall that exact proviso, but that's something that I think we need to make clear in it. To start within 6 months is a good timeline.
Yeah, I think
we can
that
always, you know, I hate to say it for some of these projects that don't even exist yet, but if there's some type of staff mechanism where we can grant an extension by a month or two administratively, without people having to come back and explain, maybe
I think
maybe
we
they
would want
don't.
them, I think we'd want them to explain why there would be a delay in the project so that, you know, we can measure, is this something that's happening on the village side? Again, and I'm going to use Mr. Rafitti as a classic example. He's got 2 pins, so we understand the tax burden that he's going to have with 2 separate parcels. But again, the opportunity to get as much as $50,000 per pin, and then the opportunity for his tenants to come in and apply for this. I don't think it would be fair to the actual marketing process if we were to hold those funds indefinitely without some measure of good faith from the applicants that, yes, indeed, they do have something, they have a bona fide plan that would show that they are going to start on a specific date. Mr. Rafitti, I completely understand May 1st, and I think he applied for the funds back in October or November? Oh, strike that, September?
Yeah.
So if he owns the property, I would hope that he's got, as a businessman, he's got some sort of plan in place to start the process or put at least a targeted start date on. And
That's a good point, Commissioner Smadilla, and it's funny when a lot of these points, they pertain directly to that property. There's not really other properties that would fit that same type of bill
Right.
in the town at this current time at least, where there would be a new owner. The only reason I bring up the 6-month timeline that I'm assuming eventually it's going to have to be stretched by a couple of months is because some of these are used in terms of an incentive for prior to somebody purchasing something. And in his case, I kind of alluded to it when he came here. The BEDA application was just really his first step out of probably a dozen different steps he was going to take. So the months continue. When he applied for it, he still had over 4 months on his contract to purchase, and that contract has since been extended by 1 month, and still, who knows if that's going to have to be extended again. So it's kind of it might not end up, this program might not be a one-size-fits-all type of scenario.
Well, I would urge caution in that, because if it's not one size fits all, I mean, remember that if we're going to apply one standard for Mr. Rafidia, we've got to do it for everybody down the line. So if I'm going to open up a hot dog stand on the corner, I hope that you would extend the same 8 or 9 months extension to me and still hold those funds that I've applied for.
I would say that different projects have different scopes and challenges, and they're not all exactly the same. I would say that reopening a hot dog stand wouldn't be as complicated and difficult as purchasing and redeveloping Bartlett Plaza.
That's your
But,
opinion.
I mean, there has to, I mean, that was what I was bringing to your attention tonight, to say, I mean, I wasn't even necessarily thinking 6 months, but maybe even longer than that. But 6 months could be a good timeline. Scott and I communicate so often with these businesses and applicants, there's not a chance that we're not going to get an update on their projects even 1 month, sometimes not even 1 week. So if somebody had to go longer than 6 months, I'm assuming there'd be a good reason for it, and we could always alert you to that. But, I mean, if you all feel that 6 months it is a reasonable timeline for sure to start a project where you've been giving BEDA grants, so we could add that to the application. I'd like to hear from some other commissioners.
Anybody else think that's a little long, 6 months? I don't know. For me, it seems like 3 months seems a lot more realistic. By the time they come in here, they have everything together. They're showing us, I don't know, refrigerators they want to buy or whatever it is. They should be ready to pull the trigger by the time we're setting aside funds, in my opinion. And I get that there's other instances, and Mr. Rafidia's project should definitely, we should have some latitude to extend if we want by you guys, but really, like, we should be pushing. We don't want to incentivize them to take their time. You know, these funds are being approved, and then they go to the next approval process. And once they get that, there should be, I mean, I'd want it to be quick personally. I don't know.
Yeah, I think 6 months is also generous, and again, it was a very tongue-in-cheek comparison with a hot dog stand and Bartlett Plaza with 2 different PIN numbers, which, quick sidebar, has Mr. Rafidia indicated which of those 2 PIN numbers he plans on applying that $50,000 grant to?
It would actually be, his plan is to rehab the entire center
Okay.
at the same time. So he wouldn't do the facade just on one space, but his first priority would be on the building that has the vacant grocery space in it, because that one, according to his plan, he would subdivide into 4 units. So his biggest expenditures, the larger expenditures would come into that center first.
Okay.
You're right, 6 months is more than long enough.
Yeah, and it's really, the program itself, and I wasn't around for the formation of it, so I don't know, but the budget makes me assume it's smaller businesses that in general we're going to be targeting, so they should be ready.
That was its primary intention, was filling individual spaces. And then when the opportunity presented itself to attract a new buyer and developer for Bartlett Plaza, this was just one of the kind of the bullets that we had to fire and one of the tools we had to utilize.
Of course.
So, yeah, it was more for
Yeah, and leave yourself the
mom and
discretion
pop
to
shops.
bump that as much as you want in the special circumstance, but there should be,
Right.
in my opinion,
I think it's important to note, though, as far as the timing is concerned, I think you make a good point, Commissioner Smedilla, but to piggyback what Tony said, each situation is different. For example, you take Mr. Rafidia. We've been meeting with him for 14 months on the possibility of redeveloping Bartlett Plaza. And it's no secret that he's alluding to possibly bring in one of the hidden gems that, quite frankly, the whole community is looking for, which is a grocery store, which is the #1 goal on our strategic plan as far as commercial redevelopment in this community. And I would hate to see somebody walking away over a technicality because they're not starting within 90 days. I think 90 days, given the investment of this property and the moving parts of the property, is probably a slim amount of time. That's just an opinion from a staff perspective. I mean, he's talking about reinvesting over $2 million into the property, and that doesn't include purchasing the property. And like Tony said, it's been under contract for
4 to 5 months.
4 to 5 months, so.
then you can just extend it another 3 months, another 3 months. But I don't think you want the hot dog stand, with all due respect to hot dog stands, to think that they have a full 6 months.
No, that, we agree
Oh,
with that.
point
So if we're not talking about Mr. Rafidia's project here, we're talking about, as you were saying,
Okay, so let's say, okay. Cafe or bistro, Bartlett Tap is a good example. This guy obviously wants to get in there and get it open as quickly as possible. He's already showed good faith with what, an estimated $135,000 investment in bringing it up to code. The guy is moving and grooving and has said, I want to be open by Super Bowl. Obviously, that's not going to happen. I want to be open by St. Patrick's Day. He's showing some good faith. It's like, I want to be open on this day. I think we should have some level of expectation from any petitioner that they have a targeted date. Mr. Tatanawa from Indian Express was explicit about that. He wanted to be open in time for Diwali in October. So I think to hold $50,000 in funds when we've kind of got a feathers today, chicken tomorrow scenario, and again, Scott, I appreciate what you said about we've got somebody that's coming in and willing to invest in that. From an economic development perspective, and again, because the program was created with the smaller business in mind, I think we've got to create either some sense of urgency for him or a stick and a carrot scenario.
Did he even clear the Cook County part yet?
No, in Mr. Rafidia's project?
Yeah.
No, the village would generally always support one of the property tax reduction programs in Cook County, provided that the property meets all the criteria. And despite its long-standing vacancy, it's still questionable whether that property meets all the criteria.
Well, then is it possible, again, we understand that Mr. Rafidia's situation is incredibly unique, and maybe even falls a little bit outside of the purview or the intention of the BEDA as it initially stood. Is it still practical for us to put a 6-month deadline, and again, or proviso on this to say, hey, when you apply, you need to show that you've made some progress in the development and you're getting close to opening up your program, or your business, and if not, we can reevaluate it. And at that time, I mean, if there's no end in sight for another several months, funds go back into the program so as to attract additional businesses, and they reapply. And again, with some reassurance to that original applicant that, yeah, it's possible, because who knows? It's very possible if he hasn't cleared all of the hurdles, as Commissioner Stephanie had said, isn't it possible that, again, his his vision for Bartlett Plaza could also crash and burn?
It certainly is possible. And one,
Not that we want to, by the way.
yeah, just thinking here about it while we discuss it, one of the things the EDC can do, I'm going to liken it to a special use permit in a way. And when somebody gets a special use permit, let's say for a liquor license, a lot of times there's certain criteria that are placed upon it, like it could be certain hours, that's the main one, or whatever the criteria might be. The EDC could always make a recommendation when an application comes in. It doesn't have to be, well, first of all, I will most likely add it, I'm going to add it in the application and just say applicants are expected to commence their projects within 6 months of, and remember, board approval, too, is different than EDC recommendation. So the gentleman, Mr. Castilla, hasn't gone before the village board yet. As a staff, we're working with him and trying to get him closer to the finish line before he does appear before the board, or at least have a more definite timeline. So the EDC can always put that in a recommendation. Let's say I bring in business X, who's applying for a $50,000 BEDA grant because they're going to spend $200,000. You can always say we recommend the $50,000 provided they commence their project within X amount of time. It can be just a given for an applicant, or it's still something you can put in your recommendation of the board.
And we're confident that Mr. Rafidia is actually going to not just rehab that plaza, but he is interested in putting tenants in there. Again, the spirit of the BEDA is to bring in tax revenue. I think we just want to be sure that he's actually doing that and not rehabbing it to put it back on the market.
Well, I think Tony's mentioned before he has some of his own businesses.
Sure,
he
I've seen
wants
them.
to put
I've
in
seen
there.
them in the
Yeah.
the northwest suburban area.
I mean, we haven't put that stipulation on the BEDA program. We certainly haven't, to say you must own a business for a certain amount of time or a property for a certain amount of time. In terms of Mr. Rafidia, his business model is keeping the shopping centers for the long term. And out of the businesses that he has proposed for this center, he would own the restaurant portion of it, about 3,000 square feet. And also the one I can only best describe as a children's play and entertainment type of business.
Okay.
So that's been his business model. And we've checked references in other communities, and they've verified that, so.
Right.
Any one of the applicants could do that. So they could fix up the Indian restaurant, put it on the market tomorrow. They've improved their property, they're going to sell it.
Absolutely.
There's nothing that says they can't. They took the funds and they used it to make improvements. That's it. That's the end of the story.
Right, it's been improved to the point where it's a revenue-generating restaurant. You know, I believe it fulfilled the intent of this program.
But it's business too. There's no
then again-
there's no proof that they'll succeed.
Well, I understand that, but something that I brought up very early on in this was that we provided some measure of a clawback provision. And I think, I'm not sure which commissioner brought it up, but they brought up something that I hadn't even thought about, it, particularly with some of these smaller restaurants. What would stop them to open up the restaurant? Now they've got a full kitchen of brand-new equipment, close up shop and sell off the equipment, which has been funded courtesy of the Bartlett taxpayers. So again, I think
I think there's two things that you guys were talking about. One was the timing. I think if I could recommend, and obviously with the commission's consent, I think the 6-month idea is a good one. I think we can incorporate that. I think after 3 months, I think perhaps a staff report, I think you would deserve that, as well would the citizens. We can provide you a staff report as to where the requester of the funds is after 3 months. And then after 6 months, we can have whoever's requesting the funds come in. I think that would be a good way to do that. And as far as the clawback provisions, there are a lot of downsides to that. I think it would be our best bet to speak to our village attorney regarding that and perhaps get back to you on some of those things, because that's a little above my head, but I think we can talk to our attorney about a clawback provision. But I think those are kind of the two things that you're talking about now. I think maybe those are the 3-month staff report and the 6-month report from the actual, is that something that would be reasonable to the commission?
I think those are great ideas, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
When you say commence the project, don't the people, and I don't have Rafidia's or others in front of me, by the time they apply for the BEDA, they have commenced the project. They have some expenses and they've started on it, correct?
Yeah, we basically require them to turn in written estimates.
Yeah.
So it's typically, what we do is the BEDA program, we've used it as the carrot, to dangle, and then trying to get somebody from just looking or contemplating a project to actually taking concrete steps towards achieving it. I'm sure there's people who will meet and go through some of the steps with who won't follow through on the project, but that's accurate. Everybody who we've told about it, and we go over the application with them saying your next step is to get some quotes on some of the work that you need to get done, get an architect. That's kind of one of the early steps, is going over that. So they've started at least that step, but not necessarily the actual work on it. So, they've shown some strong interest in it by the time they're here before you.
They don't get paid until they do the work. Is that your question?
But the definition of commencing the project, I guess, is what I'm looking for. They've usually already expended some money on
Right.
this.
I interpreted Tracy's comment as meaning some of the work being done, like bringing in some contractors, starting to refinish floors, bring in equipment, instead of just paper plans, taking hammers and nails out.
That was definitely the intention of my comment, is that it's actual
Yeah, in 6 months.
physical, there's some
Yeah.
physical progress being made.
Yeah, and my only point about the 6 months is it's touchy on this particular project. It's a big project that involves a contract. If Mr. Rafidia owned it, or if he closes on it, I'm anticipating he'd start working on it the next day.
And again, his situation is a little unique, and I think 6 months, again, very, very generous. I don't know of a single small business owner that wants to start, spending money on contractors and having work done that doesn't want to get that project over the finish line quickly.
You'll never see that unless there's big problems with a certain element of the building, or one of the contractors, but 6 months is a long time.
And am I to understand that the 50,000 that we've already moved on for him covers both pins, or is it one pin? What does that cover?
Generally, it covers a check to him towards his project, and because he has 2 pins, he intends to apply for another one. So we're not going to necessarily say this 50,000 was allocated towards the new roof on this side of the building. It would be based on his entire project, where he has indicated that he would spend at least $2 million on it. You'll see basically, again, if he moves forward on this project and he'll come in here for another application, it's going to look very similar to the first application that you saw.
So the individual property eligibility of every 3 years, it doesn't apply to this? Help me understand.
That's
what he
what
can
I'm-
do every 3 years.
Right, that's what I'm bringing up tonight for your input on is, number one, the the reasoning or necessity to have a 3-year element to the application at all. What that was meant for was not to just keep paying for rehab of the same restaurant building every year.
So each one of his
yeah.
build-outs would be a separate individual property?
If we wanted to look at it that way and keep the 3-year restriction on it, then that's the way I would be looking at it with the accounting. I would be looking at prices of it per building. It's not a TIF program, but when we had the downtown TIF and the Gorskys applied for TIF rebates, we would prorate it per building based on square footage and expenditures. That's one way we could do it. I'm just trying to convey that the 3-year part of this application is purely a policy thing that I wrote into it and that later on the EDC and the board ratified. We don't need to keep a 3-year time limitation at all, or it could be 2 years, or it could be, that could be kept on there, but with
It would
some
have to be an
type of
individual,
discretion.
a separate application anyways, right?
I'm sorry?
To get another one, they'd have to come.
You'd have to
before
have
us
another
anyways, come
application,
before the
right.
board, so why put anything in there?
Yeah. For instance, if Restaurant X got a BEDA grant in 2019, and then it closed in 2020, and somebody else bought it later that year and applied in 2021, that was the intention of the 3-year limitation, was to not have the same building over and over again. But if, they would have to apply again, yeah.
Yeah, so take it out. I mean, I don't know, it's all the same. It's gonna have to go through many layers of
True.
approvals.
True. It can be taken off or kept. Just something I wanted to bring to get some input from the EDC.
Sometimes grants, you can get maybe the same type of grant 2 years in a row, but then there has to be some time elapsed before you can apply again. You know, a grant can be given and then renewed the next year as well.
Right, right. We've done that on public works type projects on the
Yeah.
village side. We often apply for the same grant over and over
Right.
again in an effort to keep enhancing and building upon some earlier work that we've done, whether it's road work or sewer or water, sidewalks, whatever the case may be. I'm hearing that we can remove that provision and then kind of look at it on a case-by-case basis in terms of applicants. Some buildings, I'm sure, the village would be less reluctant to give repeated BEDA grants to than others.
Yeah, that might be the checks and balances there as the final approval by the board.
Right, right. It might, I put that on there as a bullet point because it might serve the village's best overall economic development interest at some point to do repeated grants year after year at a same property, like Bartlett Plaza, for instance, if we're working on a major rehab or a multi-year phased project, as this could be. He intends to do the entire rehab of it this year, if he closes on it, but also would likely come back for another grant, yet another one, possibly a third one, if he was going to build the outlot building, or the tenant might. So we don't want to necessarily limit ourselves, you know, and not have some flexibility with that. So I'm going to remove that.
Yeah, well, let's get him over the finish line in closing, and then we can obviously communicate to him
Right.
that, you know, the program is extending, and we hope that he or his future tenants apply.
Right, we all have the same goals for this to leverage a large amount of private investment to rehab properties. So that's what we've been indicating to him, that we hope to continue it, and welcome him to come back again this year.
So are we saying we're removing the 3-year limitation?
I'm hearing to remove that.
Okay.
That paragraph is doubled, duplicated too, just over the day.
The last one is the big one about the funding. I was hoping to allocate all $150,000 this year, make it look like a very successful program, getting some new places filled. I'm not saying it has to be greatly expanded, but wanted to get everybody's take on that amount, the twofold account, or amounts, I should say, of $50,000, which seems to be a fairly generous amount for most of the projects that we look at, and then the overall amount of $150,000 for the program, and just to get some thoughts and ideas on that.
Well, we've allocated $125,000 year-to-date, correct?
Correct.
And that is 8 months into the program.
Right.
So technically, we have 4 months to allocate $25,000 more to new petitioners. Is there any bites on that right now?
Probably not for a smaller project like 25 at this time. There's likely to be some $50,000 applicants besides Mr. Rafidia this coming year. It'd be hard to say right now exactly how many, but probably at least 2 coming up in the near future. So again, it's something that we use as an incentive. So it's not necessarily people that have projects in the pipeline right now, but also a lot of projects that we're trying to attract to the town.
Is it the intention of staff then to roll, if we have no other applications or approvals for the remaining $25,000 in the funds that were allocated for this last year, is it the intention to roll that into the following year?
No, we talked about that a little last month. That's not the way the village budget really works.
Okay.
So, again, Mr. Rafidia being an outlier and a bigger project, we would have to earmark the $50,000 for him that's already been
Of course,
allocated.
right.
But in terms of any unallocated funds, those will just be lost.
They'll stay in the general fund.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, $25,000 not spent.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think for benchmarking, I mean, you can't really create much of a benchmark, I think, on the past 8 months yet. Try to. I personally and professionally, I think that, having a $150,000 threshold for the second year of the program, I think is appropriate, because I think we'll hopefully get some more data on just how successful the program is, as an incentive to bring business in.
Yeah,
And
I don't
I
think
think
we have real
150,000
data for years on how successful this is, till you get property taxes back and something that really analyzes of what we've given out money to. That said, so we're really gonna have to lean on what you guys are seeing and feeling as far as like who you're talking to and what the opportunity is as far as any budget increases.
Yeah, that makes
anything
sense.
like
I'll
that. We certainly don't
probably-
have to give any, we can say no.
Well, probably, honestly, we'll be asking for more in the budget, because there's possibly 3 different projects, each one that would be $50,000 this year, and wouldn't want to necessarily have it, so the whole program goes to 3 projects. And one of those 3 would be Mr. Rafidia's. So 50,000 we can keep as the limitation, and that's the way I would present it. And you're right, it is still early in the program, but we're putting together our budget right now to put before the village board in the coming meetings. So that's the reason we brought it up a little earlier.
What was
in
your
the year.
recommendation for increasing it? Like, what would you like to see?
I mean, the amount we've discussed asking for is $250,000. And but keeping the, most likely keeping the number still at 50,000 for an individual.
And I think it's important to keep in mind when staff budgets and proposes our budgets to the board and the taxpayers, I think there's something critical to be understood about this program and how it's different than a lot of other programs that the taxpayers pay for. Unlike office supplies or fleet, when you budget for something and it's approved, you then buy the office supplies or the fleet, and it goes through the bills list or in the agenda. This particular program here, when we recommend a $50,000 grant, it goes to the EDC at the EDC committee level. Then it goes to the village committee for discussion and further scrutinization. Then from there, it will go to the village board. And then from there, they'll have to complete the work in order to get the funding. So even though 250 seems like maybe a big jump for the taxpayers to pay, they're not necessarily paying that. We're going to require a business plan that shows how they're going to reinvest the money and how quickly we can get the taxpayers their money back and the type of projects they're doing. So if you were to recommend a higher amount, it's not a rubber stamp for staff just to simply spend it. It has to go through several layers of governance in order to get that money. So that's one important thing to keep in mind about this particular line item in the budget as opposed to other line items that taxpayers may see.
I understand that, Scott, but technically we have a $125,000 tax liability. And again, I just want to, do I understand in my brain that these funds came from video gaming, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so for $250,000, which is a 40% jump year over year, which is pretty significant in any business,
Sure.
are you estimating that video gaming revenues have increased to the point where the taxpayer can actually withstand that kind of burden should we commit to $250,000 in the next calendar year?
I'd have to get the numbers, and we'll get that back to you.
Here's my other concern, is that, again, under the, used the term before, it's feathers, feathers today, chicken tomorrow. We have one business that's open under this right now, correct, using those funds. Is there an accounting for the tax revenue that's come in, even just in this short few weeks, from Indian Express Restaurant? The point that I'm trying to make is are we going to be able to see any level of offset between tax revenues and those that are actually being expended? And I say this with a particular import. We've got a new legislature in Springfield, we've got a new governor, and I'm always very concerned as to what the tax liability as a result of state actions are going to fall back to our village.
Sure, that's a long question, but based on the numbers that we're receiving from the state of Illinois on gaming, and based on the number of new businesses that have pulled petitions for video gaming, we're pretty comfortable that number will be there, yeah. But that's a good question, and I think it's something that staff will go back, based on your commentary, staff will go back and discuss and make sure we have our numbers right. Yeah, absolutely, you make some good points.
Well, I just want to make sure that this is a win-win for the taxpayers and for the community, and certainly for the business. We want to make sure that they
absolutely
are feeling whole in the process. Back to you, boss.
Moving on, are we making a motion? Or?
Is there a motion to be made?
I don't think there's a motion. I think this is still being discussed.
We were seeking input. We got ample input on the program. We're going to make some changes to it and hopefully promoting it and bringing good projects in as a result of it.
I don't see a harm based on their recommendation to increase this. We can always say no to people that come across. There's going to be plenty of checks and balances. If it runs amok, I mean, it's seems like a lot of money, but I don't feel like
I
it's
agree.
all
There's
that much in the
already
grand scheme.
A couple $50,000 ones.
Yeah.
In the works, and
I'd
there's a lot of
rather
changes
have the
happening.
cushion than,
Right, like
to
you
give
said.
it to the small businesses, you know?
Well, there's a big process to go through. It's just because we up it to, or the village ups it to 250, doesn't mean you have to spend every penny if there's nothing viable.
We'll put together some of the commentary and some of the recommendations and kind of massage them and talk to staff and certainly bring it back to you. And as always, Tony and I are always here for you. So if you have any questions or comments or anything after tonight, please, our door is always open, our phone's always on. So please ask, and we'll certainly incorporate it.
Can I ask something about this, as long as we're still going? Have you guys, where was my train of thought? Have you guys ever thought about approaching certain businesses to fit with the new zoning laws or anything like that, to fit a downtown theme with this program in mind?
Oh, absolutely. It's something we do often.
Yeah?
It's something we do at area trade shows. One of the
I mean existing businesses, actually. I mean existing businesses.
Yeah, a lot of, you know what, a lot of the existing businesses are aware of it. They've seen it in the local papers quite a bit. They've looked at doing it for expansions. A couple of them want to enhance their storefronts and add outdoor dining as well with it. So the answer to that is yes.
And we've made a point of the discussions that Tony and I have had with business owners over probably the last 3 years or so, where they've said, oh, I've really wanted to do this, or can I do this, or I wish I could do this. We've made a point of calling them or stopping by and letting them know of the program.
How have you had any discussions with other communities that do, wasn't there another community that was doing something like this?
Yes. Yes, we've based it off of a couple different communities. Mundelein has a similar program. Well, let me backtrack and say most communities have some type of business incentive program. Typically, they're TIF funded. And because this one isn't, we checked with some of the communities that do it that way, and Mundelein being one of them, and they've do similar programs. They break it down a little bit more by different amounts for different types of projects. Like they'll do a smaller amount for awnings. They have a limitation on how much for outdoor dining. We tried to make this very user-friendly. That was really the overall goal in creating it. And on the second page of this, you see I just did a bunch of bullet points: facade, windows, awnings, lighting, ADA compliance. Didn't do a different amount per every project. So we don't have somebody say, I'm applying for 10,000 for windows and doors and 5 for signs and awnings. We have them put together their entire project.
Did Mundelein like give any, after like their first year, like, oh, here's some?
Oh, yeah, theirs is,
we ran
they're
into?
very happy with it, and they've expanded it. There are a few years, they started it a few years before we did, and they do it a little differently. I didn't really bring this up, but another change I'm gonna make is it'll read up to 50%, because we haven't done any 50% rebates. If we did 50% rebates, it would have all been spent in the first couple of them. So they do some 50% rebates, and they use theirs up, they use it up pretty quickly.
This Plains is a new program called Restaurant 100,000. They have two incentives, two $100,000 incentives for opening up a restaurant.
Right. We were both looking at that today, but that's a great example. Theirs is in a downtown TIF, but they do a straight $100,000 grant per restaurant project.
So here's an idea, just a little food for thought. $250,000, we have $150,000 of that revenue already coming from video gaming. Could $100,000 of that be funded from a TIF fund? Could it be a hybrid?
It's a good question. The short answer is no, not really. This program, one of the parameters of this program is that it applies only to areas that aren't in TIFs.
But,
Because when we do, when the village does an incentive for a company in Brewster Creek Business Park, that's funded by the Brewster Creek Business Park TIF, but we cannot legally take money from, say, the Brewster Creek Business Park TIF and allocate
Okay.
it to somebody in downtown.
okay,
It has to be within the parameters of the district.
okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, that appears to conclude the BEDA discussion. Tony, you want to give us an update on the Opportunity Site E marketing plan?
I do. Site E, I know this site very, very well, 1.87 acres. It's at the corner of Railroad and Berteau. It is more colloquially known as the undeveloped portion of Bartlett Town Center. There were originally supposed to be 2 buildings there of 27 units each. The village owns this property, and for many years, I'm going to say basically didn't actively market it much, but we would field some inquiries on it every so often. We did a request for proposals on it over 1 year ago and got one response that we liked and was going through the process. So thus, we spent about 4 or 5 months with one potential developer whose project ultimately did fall through and they're not moving forward on it. So we are marketing this property now ourselves. We didn't hire a broker for it. And what I wanted to report to you tonight was, along with all this other development we have going in the downtown, like the Bartlett Tap reopening, like the land that we sold to More Brewing, and hopefully for Mr. Rafidia to upgrade Bartlett Plaza, that this is a site that we're looking to attract some multifamily housing to. The asking price for it is $660,000. I put together this flyer that you had in your packet, a 3-page marketing flyer for it. And recently, just last week, listed it on CoStar and LoopNet. And CoStar and LoopNet used to be 2 separate things, but one of them bought the other. So now when you list it on one, you list it on the other. And this is a copy of the listing. You can see we took a lot of nice aerial photos of it. Like I mentioned, the asking price for it is $660,000. The way the village came up with that price is it is 80% of the last appraised value of it. We had an appraisal done on it about a year ago. And just wanted to let you know this is the latest and greatest in our marketing efforts for this site. It's already attracted one interested party that I've been communicating with. And again, there it is from the overhead, vacant land at the southwest corner of Railroad and Berteau. There's a utility map on it. A little hard to see on the listing, but we send the utility map out when somebody asks about the property. And the rest of it is overhead shots of it. So that's one of our big goals, actually. I don't bring this up lightly. We very much want to sell this piece of land and attract some multifamily, possibly upscale apartment, rental apartments to the site, while developers are still building those in suburban downtowns. Seems like they're going up everywhere, and we don't want to miss our opportunity at getting those. So that is currently listed on some of the search engines. We can boost it also. Of course, CoStar and LoopNet offers for a fee for you to boost it, because even with my free account that I have for LoopNet, I don't see it right away when I'm searching for it because I don't have a membership for it. I can, of course, access LoopNet and CoStar listings, but I have sources that I use for that. Our membership in Choose DuPage allows us to access those through the county sometimes. So just wanted to put that more for informational purposes and to let you know that we haven't forgotten about implementing the downtown TOD plan, not by a long shot. As a matter of fact, last Wednesday, Commissioner Laporte joined us for a 2-hour meeting, 2-hour-plus meeting, talking about upgrading the zoning and overlay district for downtown Bartlett. So this is one of the key sites that was identified as the most shovel-ready residential site in our downtown. The TOD plan is already over 2 years old, so that's something that we really need to get going, and we're working at it.
So are there like certain other local communities where you could think of like multifamily housing, like that we could reach out to those? Or I'm sure you guys probably.
Yeah, that's something we have done and will do again. We did it when we issued the request for proposals. For whatever reason, we only got the one. There's some reasons for that, but in terms of, like I mentioned, the pricing, there could be some flexibility on the pricing, but really, it's pretty much we're looking to get $660,000 for it if possible.
And the
We're going to be doing some old-fashioned cold calling, too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Old-fashioned cold calling, yeah.
And the intention, of course, is to make sure that that property remains, you know, there's some measure of it becoming a revenue-producing property through property taxes, for example. And does it have the propensity for rezoning into retail?
It could be, but retail developers don't have any interest in that site
Sure.
because it's hard enough to fill these Main Street locations, let alone
Yeah.
2 blocks off. In terms, it's not just purely as a revenue generator. I mean, the revenue is great, and some of it would come at first.
Would you put a church in there?
I'm sorry?
Would you put a church in there, for example? Would you sell it to a church?
Most likely not to a church. No, we're looking really, this wouldn't be the only reason to bring this into town, but more residential density in the downtown, which could in turn help support some of these businesses.
Certainly.
For a lot of the businesses that people want in our downtown, we simply don't have the population in the area to warrant it or to meet their criteria. So this would help enhance that. And in terms of some of those bigger projects in the other towns, this is a smaller site than those. So we do run it past those developers, but most of them look for sites where they can do 200 or more units, and this site really isn't large enough for that. So we're looking for some more kind of niche downtown developers who do kind of smaller apartment projects, but nice ones.
Is there like a trade show or anything in?
They do have, trade show might not be, but they do have meetings. They have apartment developers who meet occasionally at shows. We've never gone to one of those. Like Scott said, we're doing it old-fashioned by phone calls and by emails to put it in front of people, but we haven't yet brought this site to a trade show, but the thought has crossed our minds for sure.
How many units would you anticipate going in there?
Really, that's the question every developer asks me the minute I pick up the call, but plus or minus 50. And I say plus or minus because, you know, it might be 60, it might be 65. The project that was proposed was on a very nice, smaller scale. It was 41 units. But the reason, not the only reason, but one of the reasons it's not happening was because it wasn't enough units to make it a profitable project.
Well, then you have the situation of parking too, which becomes a challenge.
It is.
1.87 acres, a lot of people in a lot.
With more units, you either need to plan for some underground parking, or you do less units and it might not be economically feasible. It's kind of a catch-22. But 50 seems to be the magic number. You might see 45, you might see 60, but it's not going to be 100, and it's not going to be 30.
And what about an office building going there? Is that feasible?
I mean, the village would certainly be open
Okay.
to that,
Great.
yeah. And we hope to be telling you about some developer we're working with on this site by sooner rather than later, like 6 months, to go back to 6 months. We would hope within 6 months we'll have somebody working on that site.
Have you guys reached out to Monroe Residential Partners?
Absolutely, Monroe is one of the few that we've spoken with, but yes.
I just found their website, and it looks like they've got a TOD development on 1.2 acres with 64 units in downtown Barrington. Seems like it's right up our alley.
You hit the nail on the head. Monroe is one out of about 4 or 5 that we have multiple discussions with.
Is there any posting there about usage, public hearings or anything?
I'm sorry, what's the question, Jerry? The,
Usage of the land for, and that site's vacant right now, so it's got it's zoned for what?
well,
Multifamily?
it's zoned, right, it is zoned for multifamily.
Okay, so
Zone,
you have
that,
to go through public hearings on that now, posted, or?
well, the long answer is that somebody could build 2 27-unit buildings there without going through any public hearings. That is what was approved probably 13 years ago on the site, or more than that, probably 14 or 15 years ago, when the village approved Bartlett Town Center. So it's zone PD. In terms of zoning, PD just means plan development, where the village approves the plans as drawn out and submitted. So if somebody didn't want to go through any public hearing or zoning process, they could build 2 27-unit buildings that would essentially have to match the existing town center buildings. In terms of anything different, they would have to go through all the zoning. The zoning term for it would be amending the PUD.
My thought is that there's always opposition anytime you want to build something, especially multifamily housing. You're always going to, gore somebody's ox.
That is
People
true.
that live close by in those single-family residential homes, you're probably going to hear from them.
Well, that particular site is actually not so much single-family residential. What you see, I don't have the pointer, but what you have directly to the west of it are the 3 existing town center condominium buildings that you see, like right here. These are the 3 condo buildings, and these are the Hillcrest Apartments. I know Commissioner Laporte owns one of these buildings here. And then if you were to go further east, you would come upon the Asbury Place townhome development. So there's not really single family in that area. And anybody we speak with, including Monroe, we ask them to not necessarily replicate the buildings in the area, but design something that fits in architecturally and aesthetically. So you're right, there could be some opposition for any project, really. But in terms of multifamily, it's been zoned multifamily for many years. Any more?
Further discussion, we can move on to any new business you might want to discuss with us.
The only one that comes to mind right now that I wanted to mention is Olivia's Place recently opened. It's in Oakfield Center. It's one of these small cafes that's going to feature in the future some video gambling machines. As of now, it's just opened as a deli, and we'll be visiting there too as a staff in the next week or two to shoot a video or some footage promoting that they opened. They feature Boar's Head meats, so it's not your typical cafe that does kind of the frozen type of food. They have some of the best deli meats that you can find over there. So that one just opened, I think maybe 2 weeks ago.
So is it something you can just run in there and get a sandwich? There's even once the
Absolutely.
meeting's there, you could just still go get lunch?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Well, once they're approved for video gaming, will it remain a deli as its primary business? It won't be like a Stella's or some of the other over 21 establishments?
You'll still be able to go in there just for food, but you're right. The way they have to separate it by the state law, somebody under 21 wouldn't be able to go back to the gambling
They've
aspect.
invested quite a bit of money too in
Yeah.
their deli cases. There were specialized deli cases from New York. So
Great.
we would hope and we'd anticipate that that investment would continue.
Great.
It's really amazing the amount of build-out that they did. That's one of the reasons we would want to promote it, is they built it out so beautifully in a shopping center that, quite frankly, could use a little more of that.
Where is that again?
It's in Oakfield Center over at Oak Avenue and Lake Street,
Oh, okay.
near the new tire place, Bungie's Tire.
I have one new business if we're done with that conversation.
Yes.
So first, I wanted to thank Scott, because I saw there was a lot of online discussion on Facebook, and I thought Scott did a great job of commenting quickly,
I second that.
and also dispelling some hearsay or rumors. I guess I was just wondering, is there other stuff we can do to help? Can we create can I identify myself as a commissioner on Facebook and talk? I feel like the discussions are great to help get any rumors dispelled right away, because there was some stuff, if you guys saw it, that was
If
like,
nothing
whoa.
else, it shows that the community doesn't really know what's going on, and they don't know where our strong points are. They don't know about Brewster Creek. They only know that there's no grocery store, and that's compared to Jewel, and
And
that,
then, people don't read minutes, it's just, I feel like there's just better ways now, because there are better ways to communicate, especially with social media, that whether we do it or we make a recommendation to the board to think about how they can better communicate with Bartletters on some of this, I just thought that was great, but I feel like we could do so much more.
I always try to direct people back to our website and our Facebook and our email. So I guess if you hear something that you want to confirm, or you hear something that may be inaccurate, send them our way,
And I want to comment on that too, that I saw when we posted that more brewing is coming to town on the Discover Bartlett page that I do. It got over 17,000 views, and Scott did a boost for that one also. And I saw all the rumors flying about it and questions about Bartlett Tap next door. And I saw some comments where you identified yourself, Fani, as a Economic Development Commissioner, and you answered a lot of those questions so nicely, kind of point by point, that I think that was, serving well in your role here on the EDC, where you know what the information is. And we would ask you all, when opportunities arise, to do the same. If somebody says something that you know is blatantly false, or maybe not intentionally, but they're misinformed in some way, then that's a good opportunity for you to promote, the village's brand, and that you're on the EDC, and here's some of the things that we are working on. We're well aware of the challenges in the downtown area, for sure. I talk about it every single month here. And you can put forward some of the strengths that we have, and some of the things that we do have going on in our downtown that are going to make it more attractive for somebody who's an apartment developer or somebody who wants to open a nice business in Bartlett Plaza. So kind of a long answer too, but that was a good way to use your role as an economic development commissioner. I did see that. Appreciate it.
And it's our jobs too. We're here all day. We know, not everybody knows everything. So we're happy to communicate with people and let them know. I mean, and sometimes you hear things and you're not sure whether to believe it or not. I can assure you that we never told Marianos to beat it. We would probably both be unemployed if that was the case. But thank you, and we'll, we're open to suggestions about letting people know things that are going on.
I would say put together bullet points, because that's all people read anyway, is the headline, and brag about what successes we had in 2018 and what's on the horizon for 2019. And it's all public information from all the board meetings and EDC meetings. Take a couple minutes, bullet point it, summarize it, and post it on what's happening in Bartlett, or,
And even some video of even you, I feel like you would, either one of you or anyone to have once or twice a month, just kind of like go over, or even like educate people on the process. Because I feel like that's always misconstrued too. Like I still feel like I'm learning the process for how, something comes from an idea to fruition. And I just thought it was crazy, like how not crazy, but I thought it was interesting how some people thought the village dictates what businesses go in. And I feel like there's just a big educational process, and even if it's somewhere on the site, or I can read about
There
how
are
it works.
people that have never owned a business. If anybody's owned a business, there's a whole lot that goes on. It's 14 months to bring to bring Bartlett Plaza. A successful business is 18 months to 2 years if you're lucky. If you survive that, it's armchair quarterbacks. It's like Goose Island had a great promotion this weekend, and it proved that it's not easy to kick a 43-yard field goal. And 103 people tried to do it, and nobody did it. Nobody came close, maybe 2 people. And that's the same thing with all those people that were beating up Bartlett on the website the other day. None of them have been there.
Things can get lost in a feed as well. Like I feel like people will sometimes make a comment, and then even though you answered it, there was still people after asking the same thing, saying the same. It was just like you could see how what we call now fake news easily spreads, because if you don't read all 250 comments and see yours or look at the timestamp on it, rumors are starting to spread. So I was just trying to think if there's, anything else, or.
I think the bullet point idea is great. We'll look
Yeah,
at
I think so
maybe some
too, and
new
put it on the.
educational tools on how to.
Additionally, we've talked about it here. If you own a business and you're on the Cook County side, you've got a whole different group of challenges than you would on the DuPage County side or the Kane County side. Again, if that's not their arena, they're just they're hiding behind the keyboard, and that's fine. That's their prerogative. It's free speech, but you can see how it can get out of control.
It gets out of hand.
And like you said, the article in your comment on Facebook was the article is a week old. Things have already changed in that amount of time.
Yeah, because I think people thought it was already purchased and done and ready to go, and it's like, whoa, we're still at, these are ideas being thrown around right now, nothing
I
is.
got some phone calls to that effect,
Right.
where I explained it's under contract, this is a concept plan. It was a big article in the local paper last week, so.
And I'm sure he was, Mr. Raphidia's just kind of, throwing ideas, doesn't probably even have the history of what people in Bartlett are thinking.
Well, the other point though too, that I really bit my tongue, because I was going to post something. My wife's like, don't post that. I have to remember who I am too. It's a community of 40,000 plus or minus people. Come to any of the restaurants on a Saturday night. JC's isn't even open after 9 o'clock. So where are all these people that want to support the businesses? These people are, God bless them that they're operating a business in Bartlett, because it's not easy.
Yeah, so whether it's bullet points or some videos, just to kind of educate.
I would say successes of 2018 and what's on the horizon for 2019. A brag sheet, there's nothing wrong with it. What's happening in Bartlett, or discover Bartlett, just talk about Bartlett itself.
Yeah, it's a good
I think
idea.
we've had a lot of good successes. I mean, even just with more brewing and someone finding, someone coming in to invest in the tap. I mean, we all want to see change overnight, but realistically,
Well, and again, our economic base is so diverse. I mean, I don't think we talk enough about the success of Brewster Creek. I mean, while it's a business park, I mean, how cool is it that we have Rana Pasta, who has not just been a phenomenal tenant and good corporate neighbor, but they're expanding. And mean, I get such a sense of pride every time I walk into a grocery store and I see Rana pasta there, and it's like, this is made locally, this is great. So, yeah, we do, we have a lot of success stories, and obviously the advent of all of the food industries. So, yeah, quite frankly, people are, self-declared foodies these days, so they really should be made aware of the successes we have here, whether it's downtown or, out in Brewster Creek or in one of the other smaller plazas.
Well, there could be 5 pizza places here. Capitalism and free market will determine whether they survive or not.
That's right,
Well, at least there's somebody out there trying to
that's right,
make a go of it and
that's right.
generate. There's probably 5 pizza places in St. Charles.
Yeah, and the food industries, or restaurant industry is one of the hardest to make it in, so we applaud everybody that's sticking around.
Pizza's a relatively popular food, too.
Yeah, look at Chicago, but, God forbid you guys put another one to Bartlett, or another one comes to Bartlett, people lose their minds.
So thank you, Scott.
Okay, it seems like we've wrapped that up. Last item would be adjournment. Anybody interested?
I move to adjourn.
Second it.
I'm sure everybody's in favor, so
Well,
let's just say we're adjourned.
Aye.